Holly Hughes, just to you first. What do you say to those staffers who featured in the Network 10 stories, who had been sharing these pretty disgraceful photos and images with each other?
Go. If you know who you are, just leave. Because the behaviour was so abhorrent and so appalling. I think it's really been beyond anyone's comprehension. I mean, who does that? Who even thinks that that's an appropriate thing to do, whether it's in the workplace or not? I mean, it really is just absolutely disgusting. But what they are doing by staying, they're putting a cloud over everybody. And not everyone behaves badly. Not everyone will participate. In fact, I would suggest the vast majority of people would never participate in this sort of disgraceful behaviour. So it's time to go. They have been quite often, I'm assuming these people have been, given a job, given the privilege to work in this building that I love. I love what this building stands for, and they have besmirched the building, they've besmirched everyone they work for, they've made the Liberal Party and everything we stand for look incredibly poorly. They owe it to the party, they owe it to this building, they owe it to Australian democracy to take the cloud away from everybody else and leave.
All right, well, Josh Wilson, I'm keen to get your thoughts on this. I mean, how do you think, you've been in politics now for a while, how do you think a culture develops that enables this kind of,
Well, I don't know that I can explain that behaviour. It's pretty extraordinary, but clearly we have a well-entrenched culture in Australia that has strong elements of sexism and misogyny, the disempowerment of women, the underrepresentation of women. And so we have to grab hold of that and start to address it. I'm glad that there are some conversations around that, including from people like Holly about what needs to be done in terms of political representation. But then there are the workplace issues that need to be addressed as well.
I'm keen to get on to the representation quota debate in just a moment. But, I mean, we've been talking a lot about what can change here at Parliament House. I know that there is an investigation underway by Kate Jenkins, the Sex Discrimination Commissioner. But just sticking with you, Josh, I'm curious, what kind of concrete changes do you think could be made? Having, been a politician, you obviously work with your staffers. Is it the hours? Is it the alcohol consumption? What could change here to improve the place?
Well, I think there's some general cultural things about the atmosphere, the expectations that people have of one another, the way they treat one another, the way that we communicate with one another, and then there are some systemic things. We need to have a complaint process that doesn't mean staff have to go to their immediate superior, because clearly that's holding people back from being honest about some of the stuff that's going on, because they fear about the consequences for them personally. So that's something we've addressed in Labor, and I've reflected on that. I've thought about the fact that, in my office, generally I'd expect people to come to raise things with me, but they should have the ability to go and raise it with someone else.
Yeah, because right now, if your staffer had a complaint, they'd go to your Chief of Staff, I'd assume, who is basically the MP's sort of, right-hand person, really.
Well, in a relatively small office like mine, I'd always encourage people to come directly to me. But people structurally should have other options. They need to do that. And then also, as a result of seeing those things come out, I think we would see them being dealt with and the consequences, and that would help set a much better tone in the building and in other parts of Australian life.
Yep, and Holly Hughes, what do you think about that? What kind of changes do you think is? I mean, because a few things that have been mentioned so far are things like the hours are very, very long. It's a very kind of a work hard, play hard culture. There is a lot of drinking. I mean, that's the case in a lot of workplaces, but are these kind of changes that you think need to be made?
The hours, I think, are fundamentally where you really start the problem, because when you're spending from sort of 7 a.m. through to quite often 10:30, 11:30, and in the case of the Senate, sometimes well into the early hours of the morning, you're not talking about family-friendly hours, and you're not talking about hours that are conducive to a constructive and healthy workplace when you've got
everyone's just fatigued all the time.
Everyone's exhausted. We've got Senate estimates this week, and they run from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. every single day, and that's if you manage to finish on time. There's not many workplaces that would be expected to function at full capacity when you're doing 14-hour days in a series of committee hearings. So it is something that I think does need to be looked at. I know the House has reduced its hours, that they now finish at 8 o'clock every night. And I think there's a lot more sense in that. The Senate's tried the same, but we still have, obviously, Senate estimates, but we also have Monday nights every sitting week. We're here until well after 10. So the hours are, I think, problematic, and a lot of it stems from that. The other thing is this is like a microcosm, this is like a micro city here, if you like, because not everyone's employed by the same organisation. Everyone sort of has different jobs to do, and it's not necessarily all within the same sort of parliamentary sphere. And so people are here spending sometimes more time than they're spending where they actually live during the course of each year. So it almost becomes a separate kind of life for a lot of people because they are here more than they're at home.
Yeah, and for a lot of people...
And that's not just MPs and senators, that's for staff as well. They're here more than they're at home.
And often a person's, partner, friends, family act as their kind of anchor.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I just say, and I think there's a broader accountability piece because I think we've seen over time that there's been a bit of a culture in Parliament and in government where when mistakes are made, the sort of the first approach is around minimising the ripples that come from the mistakes rather than holding the people who have made errors or who really should take responsibility actually bear the consequences of their action. Now, if that is happening to some degree at the senior levels of the show, then it does bleed down into every other part of the workplace.
Well, just on that, let's talk about this looming cabinet reshuffle. We're expecting sometime, could be as early as tomorrow, that Christian Porter will be stripped of his Attorney General's portfolio. Linda Reynolds moved out of the Defence portfolio. Just sticking with you, Josh, Labor has repeatedly called for an independent inquiry into Christian Porter to determine whether he's a fit and proper person to occupy the Attorney General's role. Now, to be very clear, he has denied the historical rape allegation that has been made against him. But would we still need an inquiry if he's no longer in the AG's role?
Well, I think the inquiry is still necessary because at the moment it's a scorched earth of unaccountability on every front in relation to all of the things that have been going on. So until we start to see the government and the Prime Minister moving from the see no evil, hear no evil kind of position to taking some responsibility, wanting to know, not saying, well, I haven't been advised or nobody's told me or I don't know or it wasn't mentioned to me, actually being proactive, getting to the bottom of things and then showing leadership by holding people to account. In the case of Christian Porter, I mean, only in the last week we've learned that in his role as Attorney General, he misrepresented legal advice in relation to the Medivac bills. One of the things that we need in all of the conversation that's been around that position must be, even above other cabinet ministers, I would say, must be a person of the highest integrity and the highest character. And Christian Porter, unfortunately, hasn't shown that in a number of areas, even before this latest episode.
But if he's no longer the Attorney General, then why would you need an inquiry? Like, what question would you be seeking to answer?
Well, to get to the bottom of what occurred. We still don't know. I mean, there are questions being put to the Prime Minister now, I don't know, 16 or 17 times, about the backgrounding by people in his media team of journalists in relation to Brittany Higgins' loved ones. Now, that goes to this issue of culture and it goes to this issue of character. If, in relation to a person who's been the victim of an alleged assault, there's some sort of instinct within a media team of the Prime Minister to go and sort of run down the reputation of the family of the person who has suffered that awful alleged crime, that really goes to the culture in this place. And how the Prime Minister can come into the House every day and just pretend that he doesn't know or he's not interested in knowing really is hard to fathom. All
right, well, Holly Hughes, I just want to get your response to that because the former Liberal staffer, Brittany Higgins, has now made a formal complaint to the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, basically about reports that the Prime Minister's staff have been backgrounding the media against her partner. Are you aware of this?
This is the first I've heard of it. So I'm pleased that if Ms Higgins is now taking appropriate steps through appropriate channels, it's never appropriate, I don't think, to run your argument through the media before going through appropriate channels. So it's good that, I saw some couple of things come through today from journalists that there was a complaint made on national television. Well, that's not an official complaint. It's also not a complaint to the police. So I'm very pleased. I understand she's made a complaint to the police. I understand if this is what you're saying, she's made a complaint to the Chief of Staff for it to go through the correct channels, and that's what should have been happening from the beginning. I would like to respond, though, with regards to they denied the allegations, and I do think, as both parliamentarians but also in the media here, we need to be very mindful that people aren't punished for allegations that are unproven, and the Minister Porter has denied them and it is now subject to a defamation case. If we start making people lose their careers, lose their jobs and respond due to an allegation that is unproven, cannot be tested, not subject under the rule of law because of the situation, we find ourselves in very dangerous territory because, for the grace of God, go I. Every single one of us could be victim of that. And we know that these days people do make allegations and smears that aren't always proven to be correct. So we need to be mindful that no one's, making too hasty a decision here. And with regards to the inquiry, there is now a case that is, you've mentioned with regards to defamation of the ABC. And I think that in a proper court of law, you'll probably find more information out than you would from an inquiry, especially when people are put under oath.
Okay, well, time is just running out because we've got to let Josh Wilson get to question time. But just before we go, I wanted to ask you about quotas. The Liberal Party has been so opposed to them for so long, but is it time for the party to really consider this?
Look, I'm one of the people that's been opposed to quotas. I very much believe in a merit-based system. I went through quite the rigmarole to get to this place, including a High Court challenge. So I probably know better than anyone the resilience that it takes to really get to this place, but also to survive in this place. So we do have to be careful that we're not in any way reducing the burden on people proving their merit to getting into Parliament. But it's not about equality of outcome, it's about equality of opportunity. And my concern at the moment is that we're not necessarily giving that equality of opportunity. So we should maybe look at quotas and everything else to put it all back on the table and have a look at how we can get more women here, but particularly into our safe seats, because as Josh is well aware, when the tide goes in, difference in the party and particularly in the gender disparity very, very quickly.
And just very briefly, Josh Wilson.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, meritocracy is just cover for discrimination and prejudice in Australian society. So when you look at entrenched disadvantage in the community as a whole, I mean, if the answer to that is, because the people who've got a lot deserve it and the people who have nothing deserve that as well, what kind of a nation would we be? The truth is, it's not meritocracy that has led us to where we are. It's entrenched discrimination against women. And if you don't do something about that, if you just keep saying nice things and hoping for the equality fairy to come along and fix it, you'll be waiting forever. So Labor took steps to basically address what is entrenched discrimination against women. And as a result, we're at 48% in the caucus. We're 50-50 in our shadow cabinet when we were at 10% 25 years ago. So those are the kinds of structural steps as opposed to the sort of the wishy-washy motherhood statements that we need to take if we're going to change the way things are and let women share their part in the leadership of our nation.
All right, Josh Wilson, Holly Hughes, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you.
Well, as we were just discussing, as part of his efforts to reset the conversation about women, the Prime Minister for the first time suggested the Liberal Party should consider quotas. The party has historically been deeply opposed to the idea, but the continued focus on the toxic culture in politics has made at least some reconsider that view. Labor has used quotas since the 1990s, and as Josh Wilson was just saying, it's nearly reached 50-50 gender representation. Here's the Deputy Liberal leader speaking today.
We only have 26% of our representatives in the House being female.